You've rehearsed a conversation with someone who isn't there. Standing in the shower, driving alone, whispering words into a room that never answers. What if the room answered on national television? The Garza family was losing, not badly, not the blowout kind of losing that makes the audience wince and the host gentle, but steadily, methodically, the way a slow leak loses water. The Petersons from Omaha had taken 3 of 4 rounds. The score was lopsided enough that the producers in the booth had already started discussing the transition to the next family taping. It was, by every measurable standard, an unremarkable game between 2 unremarkable families on an unremarkable Wednesday afternoon at Sunset Bronson Studios. 400 people in the seats, 6 cameras rolling, Steve Harvey at the podium, doing what Steve Harvey does, keeping the room alive, even when the game is flat, finding the joke, finding the human moment, pulling warmth from the mechanical rhythm of question, answer, points, repeat. But Steve kept looking at the woman in position 3 on the Garza side. He had been looking at her since the introductions, not in the way he looks at a contestant who's about to give a funny answer, or in the way he looks at someone who's about to fall apart. He was looking at her the way you look at a clock when you know the alarm is about to go off, but haven't told anyone else it's set. Her name was Luciana Garza. She was 34. She stood between her mother, Yolanda, on her left, and her younger brother, Mateo, on her right, and she was quieter than anyone else on her team. Not withdrawn, not sulking, just still. The kind of stillness that comes from a person who has learned to take up as little space as possible, and has gotten so good at it that most people don't notice she's doing it. She had brown-black hair pulled into a low ponytail, small gold earrings, a white blouse buttoned to the collar, hands clasped in front of her, fingers interlaced, knuckles faintly pale from the pressure. She smiled when her family scored. She clapped when the audience clapped. She did everything a person does when they're participating. But she was somewhere else. Part of her was somewhere else, and Steve Harvey could see the part that was missing, the way a carpenter can see the gap in a frame that looks fine to everyone who isn't a carpenter. The game ended. The Petersons won. Standard procedure. The losing family stays on stage for a brief segment. The winning family heads to fast money. The cameras were resetting. The floor director was calling positions. And Steve, instead of moving to the fast money podium, walked down the Garza line, shaking hands, thanking them for playing, doing the warm exit that the show gives every family. A few personal words, a quick joke, the signal that their time has been appreciated even though their time is over. He stopped in front of Luciana. "You were quiet today," he said. She nodded. "I'm not really a TV person," Steve said. "Nobody on this show is a TV person. They're just people on TV. There's a difference." He paused. He tilted his head. "You doing okay?" Luciana looked at him. She started to say yes. The word was forming. The automatic, reflexive, protective yes that she had deployed 10,000 times in her life. The yes that was not an answer, but a door being closed. And then she stopped. Something in Steve's face, something in the way he was looking at her, something in the fact that a man she had watched on television since she was 12 was now standing 3 feet away and asking a question that felt less like a pleasantry and more like an invitation, caused the word to stall. She stood there with her mouth slightly open, and the yes caught somewhere between her lungs and her teeth, and she said, instead, "No." The studio fell completely silent, not because anything dramatic had happened, because Luciana had said the words so quietly that the people closest to her, her mother, her brother, Steve himself, leaned in. And when the people closest to a microphone lean in, the room follows. And suddenly 400 people were tilted forward in their seats, pulled by the gravity of a single syllable they almost didn't hear. Steve said, "Talk to me." Luciana shook her head. Her eyes were full, but nothing had fallen yet. She said, "Not here. I can't. Not here." Steve looked at the floor director. He looked at the producer in the booth. He looked at Luciana. Then he did something that disrupted the production schedule by 22 minutes and caused 2 union crew members to quietly start calculating overtime. He said, "Yes, here, right now, whatever it is, because I've been watching you all afternoon and you're carrying something that's too heavy for that blouse." The audience laughed. Luciana almost laughed. And in the small crack that the almost laugh made in her composure, the thing she was carrying shifted, and she said, "Today is 22 years. 22 years since what? Since I saw my father." To understand those 22 years, to understand the weight that had been sitting on Luciana Garza's chest since she was 12 years old, the weight that had made her quiet on a game show and still in family photographs and careful in every room she entered, as though taking up too much space might cause something fragile to break. You have to go back to a morning in August 2003 in a small yellow house on Mariposa Street in San Antonio, Texas, when Luciana was 12 and her father, Roberto Garza, was 40, and the front door opened and closed, and her life split into 2 unequal halves. Roberto was a tile setter. He had been setting tiles since he was 19, bathrooms, kitchens, entryways, custom work that required kneeling on concrete for 8 hours a day with a wet saw and a level, and the kind of patience that most people lose after 20 minutes. He was good at it. Contractors in San Antonio requested him by name. He could lay a herringbone pattern in a master bathroom in 2 days that would last 30 years without a single cracked grout line. His hands were the tools, scarred, calloused, permanently stained with thinset around the cuticles, and gentle. Those hands had built a dollhouse for Luciana when she was 6, from scrap tile and leftover wood, each tiny room floored in a different pattern: marble in the kitchen, terracotta in the living room, blue mosaic in the bathroom. And Luciana kept that dollhouse until she was 27, when she finally let Mateo's daughter play with it. And even then she watched from across the room with the vigilance of a woman supervising the handling of a relic. Roberto's wife, Yolanda, worked as a receptionist at a dental practice on Fredericksburg Road, earning $28,400 a year. Roberto's income varied. Good months were $4,800, slow months were $2,100, and the variance created a financial rhythm that Yolanda described as living on a trampoline. Some months you're up and you can see everything. Some months you're down and you can't see past the edge. They managed. The house on Mariposa was paid for. Roberto's parents had bought it in 1978 and left it to him. So there was no mortgage. Utilities, insurance, groceries, and the children's needs came to roughly $2,600 a month. In good months, there was breathing room. In slow months, there was Roberto picking up side work, patching driveways, grouting pool decks, anything that kept the hands moving and the bills paid. The problem was not money. The problem was Roberto's brother, Esteban. Esteban Garza was 37. He had been in and out of trouble since he was 15. Petty theft, possession, a DUI at 22, an assault charge at 26 that was pleaded down to disorderly conduct. He lived in a series of apartments and spare rooms across the South Side, never more than 12 months in any one place, and he cycled through Roberto's life with the regularity of a season, appearing when he needed money, disappearing when he had it, reappearing when it was gone. Roberto loved his brother. This was the problem. He loved Esteban with the immovable, illogical loyalty of an older brother who remembered the kid Esteban had been before the trouble started, the kid who used to help Roberto carry tile samples to job sites, and who could do math in his head faster than anyone Roberto knew, and who had once built a working radio from spare parts at a garage sale when he was 11. Roberto saw that kid every time he looked at Esteban. Yolanda saw the man Esteban had become. They argued about this, not occasionally, frequently, with increasing volume and decreasing resolution. In July 2003, Esteban was arrested for possession with intent to distribute. He called Roberto from the Bejar County Jail. He needed $5,000 for bail. Roberto went to the bank. He withdrew $5,000 from the account he shared with Yolanda, the account that held $7,200, the account that contained the family's entire financial margin, the account that Yolanda checked every Friday the way a pilot checks fuel levels. He bailed Esteban out. He did not tell Yolanda. He planned to replace the money with the next month's tile work. He planned to handle it quietly, invisibly, the way he had handled every Esteban crisis for 20 years. By absorbing the cost himself and presenting a smooth surface to his family. Yolanda found out on a Friday. She checked the account. The balance was $2,200. She called the bank. She was told about the withdrawal. She called Roberto. Roberto, standing in a client's bathroom in Alamo Heights, with a wet saw and a half-finished shower surround, answered the phone and heard his wife say 4 words. "Where is the money?" He told her. He told her the truth, because Roberto Garza was many things, but a liar was not one of them. Not with Yolanda, not about anything except Esteban, and even with Esteban, the lies were not lies so much as omissions, gaps in the narrative that he filled with silence and hoped no one would notice. He told her he had bailed Esteban out. He told her he would replace the money. He told her he was sorry. Yolanda said, "This is the last time, Roberto. The last time." It was not the last time. In August 2003, 3 weeks after the bail, Esteban came to the house on Mariposa Street. He needed a place to stay. Just a few nights, he said, just until he figured things out. Roberto said yes. Yolanda said no. They argued in the kitchen while Luciana sat in her bedroom with the dollhouse on her lap and listened to her parents' voices rise and fall through the wall like something alive, something with its own respiratory system, breathing in accusations and exhaling silences. The argument lasted 2 hours. When it was over, Roberto walked into Luciana's room. He sat on the edge of her bed. He looked at the dollhouse. He said, "Mija, I have to go stay somewhere else for a little while, just until your mom and I figure some things out." Luciana said, "Where?" Roberto said, "I'm going to stay with Uncle Esteban." Luciana said, "Why can't Uncle Esteban stay with Uncle Esteban?" Roberto looked at his 12-year-old daughter and had no answer for a question that a child had seen through in 6 words. He kissed her forehead. He said, "I'll be back soon, I promise." He left that night with a duffel bag and a toolbox. Luciana watched from the window. He loaded the truck. He pulled away from the curb. The taillights shrank down Mariposa Street until they were 2 red dots, and then they were nothing. He did not come back soon. He did not come back at all. What happened was not abandonment in the way that word is usually understood. It was erosion. Roberto stayed with Esteban. Esteban's situation deteriorated. There were more legal issues, more money, more crises that consumed Roberto's attention and his income and his time the way a fire consumes oxygen, invisibly, inevitably, until nothing is left to breathe. Roberto called Yolanda. The calls became arguments. The arguments became silences. The silences became gaps. A week without calling, then 2 weeks, then a month. Roberto called Luciana on her 13th birthday. He called on her 14th. He missed her 15th. By her 16th, Yolanda had changed the phone number. She told Luciana it was because of spam calls. Another lie shaped like protection. Roberto moved. He left San Antonio. He followed work, tile setting in Houston, then Dallas. Then for several years he dropped off the grid entirely, living in cash, working under the table, falling into the kind of invisible life that exists in the margins of America's economy, where a man can work 60 hours a week and still have no bank account, no permanent address, no documentation that he exists, except the floors he's laid in other people's houses. He became a ghost with calloused hands, a father reduced to a memory, then a question mark, then, for Luciana, in the years between 18 and 30, an absence so large it had its own weather, its own gravitational pull, bending everything in her life toward the empty space where he should have been. Luciana didn't talk about her father. She didn't say, "My father left." She said, "I grew up with my mom," which was true and told people nothing, and was exactly the amount of information she wanted the world to have. She graduated from Holmes High School. She enrolled at UTSA, studied social work, earned a bachelor's degree in 2013 and a master's in 2016. She became a licensed clinical social worker specializing in family reunification. The particular cruelty of her career choice was not lost on her. She spent her professional life helping other people find their way back to the families they'd lost, while she herself remained unfound. She told a therapist once, during her own mandated supervision sessions, that she had chosen the field because if I can't fix my own family, I can at least fix the system that breaks other people's. The therapist asked if that was healing or avoidance. Luciana said, yes. Matteo, 5 years younger, had been 7 when Roberto left. His memories were different, softer, blurrier, less formed. He remembered the truck. He remembered the toolbox. He didn't remember the argument. He didn't carry the departure the way Luciana did. Not because it hurt him less, but because he had less material to build the hurt from. Luciana had 12 years of her father, 12 years of the dollhouse, of riding on his shoulders to Home Depot on Saturday mornings, of watching him kneel on bathroom floors with a level in his hand and a patience that seemed infinite. She had enough memories to furnish a house, and every room in that house was empty now, and she walked through it constantly, involuntarily, the way people return to buildings in dreams. Yolanda never remarried. She never said why. She didn't speak about Roberto. She didn't keep photos. She didn't answer when Matteo asked, once, at 15, "Do you think Dad ever thinks about us?" Yolanda was peeling potatoes at the kitchen sink, and she stopped peeling, and she held the potato and the peeler, and she stood very still for 6 seconds, and then she resumed peeling and said, "Set the table, mijo." And that was the end of the conversation, and the end of every conversation about Roberto Garza in the house on Mariposa Street. The family feud application was Matteo's doing. He was 29, married, a mechanic at a Toyota dealership, a man who fixed things for a living the way his father had laid tile, with his hands, carefully, patiently, permanently. He submitted the application with Yolanda, Luciana, his wife Anita, and himself. 5 Garzas. He said it would be fun. He said it would be a family thing. Luciana suspected nothing. Yolanda suspected nothing. They flew to Los Angeles. They taped the show. They lost to the Petersons. And now Steve Harvey was standing in front of Luciana asking her to talk about the things she didn't talk about. 22 years, Steve said. He repeated the number slowly, as though tasting it. You haven't seen your father in 22 years. Luciana nodded. Her jaw was tight. Do you know where he is? No, she said. I've looked. Through work. I do family reunification, so I know how to search. I've used every database, every resource. I found a phone number in 2019 that might have been his. I called it 11 times. Nobody answered. I left one message. She paused. I said, Dad, it's Lucy. If this is you, I just want you to know that I'm okay, and I'm not angry, and I still have the dollhouse. He never called back. I don't know if it was even his number. Steve pressed his hand to his forehead. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he said, What did you want to say to him, if you could? Luciana's composure held, barely, visibly, the way a dam holds when the water is at the absolute top of the concrete, and one more drop will send it over. She said, I wanted to say that I understand now. I'm a social worker. I work with families that fall apart. I know what happens when someone is caught between the family they have and the family member they can't let go of. I know it's not as simple as choosing. I know the guilt eats you alive. I know you think you'll fix it and come back, and every day you don't come back makes the next day harder, until the distance is so big that coming back feels impossible and staying away feels like mercy. I know all of that. I learned it professionally. But I knew it already, because I've been living inside the absence my father created for 22 years, and I've mapped every inch of it. She stopped. She breathed. She said, I just wanted to tell him that the distance was never as big as he thought, that I would have taken him back on any day. On any day. The studio fell completely silent for the second time. Steve looked at the floor. He looked at Yolanda, who was standing at position 1 with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, and her face locked in the expression of a woman who has heard her daughter say something she herself has felt for 22 years and never spoken. He looked at Matteo, who was standing at position 4 with his hand over his mouth and his eyes red and wet. He looked at Anita, standing at position 5, gripping her husband's arm. Then Steve Harvey looked at the double doors at the back of the stage, and he said, Luciana, I need you to turn around. Luciana's body went rigid, every muscle. Her hands, still clasped in front of her, tightened until the knuckles went white. She didn't turn. She stood perfectly still, facing Steve, and her eyes widened, and her breathing changed. Faster, shallower, the breathing pattern of someone whose body has understood something before their mind has approved it. Turn around, sweetheart, Steve said again, softer now. She turned. The double doors opened, and through them walked a man. 56 years old, gray-haired, thin, wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearms, exposing hands that were scarred and calloused and permanently stained with thin set around the cuticles. He was carrying something, a small object, held in both hands, the way you hold a thing that is fragile and irreplaceable and has been kept safe for a very long time. It was a tile. A single hand-cut ceramic tile, 4 inches square, glazed in blue mosaic. The same blue mosaic that floored the bathroom of the dollhouse he had built for his daughter when she was 6 years old. Roberto Garza stopped 10 feet from his daughter. His face was wrecked, not composed, not controlled, the face of a man who has walked through a door he spent 22 years believing he would never have the right to open. His lips were pressed together, his chin was trembling, his eyes were locked on Luciana, and the expression in them was not the expression of a man who is sorry, although he was, or the expression of a man who is afraid, although he was that too. It was the expression of a man looking at his daughter as an adult for the first time, seeing the 12-year-old he left overlaid on the 34-year-old she became, and understanding in real time that the distance he thought was infinite had only ever been 10 feet and a door. The studio fell completely silent for the third time. The silence was absolute. Not a breath, not a cough, not a chair shifting. 400 people and a 60-person crew suspended in the space between a father and a daughter who had not occupied the same room since the year the first iPhone was still 4 years from existing. Luciana did not move. Her body was locked. Her hands were at her sides now, fingers open, and she was shaking. A fine, visible tremor running through her frame. The kind of shaking that happens when the nervous system receives too much information at once and cannot decide whether to advance or retreat or collapse. Her mouth was open. No sound was coming out. Her eyes were on her father's face, and they were searching it the way a person searches a face they have been reconstructing from memory for 2 decades, checking every feature against the stored version, finding the differences, the gray hair, the deeper lines, the way his shoulders had narrowed with age, and the sameness, the terrible, wonderful sameness of a face that had tucked her in at night and watched her from the truck window and disappeared down Mariposa Street and lived behind her eyelids for 22 years. Roberto spoke first. His voice was hoarse. It broke on the second word, and he rebuilt it, and it broke again, and he let it stay broken. "Mija," he said, "I heard your message. It was my number. I listened to it every day for 3 years. I was too ashamed to call you back. I didn't think I had the right." Luciana made a sound. Not a word. The sound that exists before words. The sound that comes from the part of a person that language has not yet reached. A raw, torn exhale that contained 22 years of Father's Days spent looking at the ceiling. 22 years of watching other girls walk with their fathers and feeling the phantom limb of her own. 22 years of the dollhouse sitting on a shelf with blue mosaic tiles in a tiny bathroom, gathering dust and holding everything. She closed the 10 feet in 3 steps. She hit her father's chest, and her arms went around him, and Roberto's arms went around her, and the tile, the blue mosaic tile he had carried onto the stage, was pressed between them, between her blouse and his shirt, a 4-inch square of glazed ceramic caught in the space between a father and a daughter. And Luciana said, muffled, sobbing, barely audible, "You kept it! You kept it!" "I kept all of them," Roberto said. "Every scrap from that dollhouse, every piece. I've been carrying them for 22 years. This one I keep in my wallet." Luciana pulled back. She looked at the tile. She looked at her father. She said, "The dollhouse is still at Mom's house. I never let anyone take it apart." Roberto's face crumbled. The composure he had barely maintained dissolved, and he pressed his forehead against the top of his daughter's head, and he wept, openly, without restraint. The weeping of a man who has just learned that the thing he built when he was happy survived the years when he wasn't. That the small blue-tiled bathroom and the marble kitchen and the terracotta living room had been standing in a house on Mariposa Street the whole time he was gone, waiting, the way his daughter had been waiting, and neither of them knew the other was doing it. Yolanda had not moved. She stood at position 1, 3 feet from her daughter and the man she had married and the man who had left, and her face held every emotion a human face can hold simultaneously: anger and grief and relief and love. and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent 22 years being strong enough for two parents and is now being asked to share the stage with the one who left. Her hands were still flat against her thighs, her back was still straight. She was shaking, a tremor identical to Luciana's, the genetic signature of Garza women under impossible stress. Mateo moved first. He walked from position 4, past Anita, past the podium, and he stood in front of Roberto and looked at the father he remembered as a pair of taillights and a toolbox. And he said, "I was 7. I didn't understand. I understand now." And he put his arms around his father and his sister, and the three of them stood in a triangle of held grief, and the blue tile was still between Luciana and Roberto, and Mateo's hand was on his father's back, and the geometry of the embrace was the geometry of a family reassembling itself from fragments. Steve Harvey was standing 4 feet away with both hands clasped in front of him and tears running freely down his face. Cameraman Tanya Reeves was crying behind her viewfinder. A sound technician in the booth had removed her headset. 2 camera operators had lowered their rigs. A production assistant named Kenji was standing in the wings with his clipboard pressed against his chest and his eyes closed. Steve waited. He waited until Luciana lifted her head from her father's chest, until Mateo stepped back, until the breathing in the family slowed from desperate to deep. Then he stepped forward. "Luciana," Steve said, "I need to tell you something. Your brother Mateo found your father." Luciana turned to Mateo. Her mouth opened. Mateo said, "That phone number you called in 2019, the one you left the message on? You told me about it last year, after your 3rd glass of wine at Christmas, and I don't think you remember telling me. But I wrote it down. I traced it. It took me 4 months. I found him in Brownsville. He's been laying tile in the Rio Grande Valley for 8 years. I flew there. I sat on his porch. I told him about you. I told him about the dollhouse. I told him about the message you left. And I told him that if he didn't come to this show and see his daughter, I would never forgive him, and neither would God." Luciana stared at her brother. She pressed both hands to the top of her head. She said, "You flew to Brownsville?" "I fix things," Mateo said. "It's what I do." Steve said very quietly, "And Yolanda knew. She gave her permission. Because whatever happened between her and Roberto, she has always known that her daughter needed her father. And she is the kind of woman who puts her children's needs above her own pain. And she has been doing that for 22 years. And that is the most expensive kind of love there is." Yolanda's composure broke. Finally, after 22 years of being the wall, she cracked. And the sound she made was small and private, and it traveled across the studio like a frequency only certain people could hear. The frequency of a woman who has been angry for a very long time, and is now being asked to hold the anger and the love at the same time, which is the hardest thing any human being can do. Roberto looked at Yolanda. He said, "Yo, I'm sorry. I know those words aren't enough. I know they can't fill 22 years. But they're all I have, and they're true, and I will spend the rest of my life proving them." Yolanda looked at him. She didn't move toward him. She didn't move away. She said, "You don't get to prove them to me. You prove them to her." She pointed at Luciana. "Every day. Every single day. That's the deal." Roberto nodded. "That's the deal." Steve turned to the camera. He walked forward. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home right now. There are parents watching this who left. I'm not here to judge you. Life is complicated and people break. And sometimes the leaving is the worst thing you've ever done, and also the only thing you could do at the time. I'm not going to pretend I understand every situation. But I'm going to say this. The door is not as heavy as you think it is. Your child is on the other side of it. They are carrying a dollhouse they won't let anyone touch. They are leaving voicemails on numbers they're not sure are yours. They are mapping the distance between you and them, and they are telling themselves it's infinite, and it is not. It is 10 feet. It is a door. It is one word. Mija. Say it. Walk through. Your child will meet you on the other side. I promise you that. The audience rose. The ovation was not immediate. It built, slowly, unevenly, the way real emotion builds, starting with the people closest to the stage, and rippling outward until 406 people were on their feet, and the sound was heavy and sustained, and carried the particular resonance of people applauding not entertainment, but truth. But Steve wasn't done. "Roberto," he said. "During the break, Matteo and I talked. He told me you've been living in a one-room apartment in Brownsville and working for cash, and you haven't had health insurance in 14 years. Here's what's happening. The Steve Harvey Foundation is covering your health insurance for the next 24 months. Full coverage. You're 56 years old, and you've been laying tile since you were 19, and your knees and your back need a doctor. And you're going to see one." Roberto pressed both hands to his face. His calloused fingers covered his eyes, and his shoulders shook. Luciana gripped his arm. But Steve wasn't done. "And I spoke to a friend of mine who runs a construction firm here in the Los Angeles area. He's looking for a master tile setter, someone with real experience, someone who can train apprentices. He wants to meet you. The position is based in San Antonio." Roberto lowered his hands. He looked at Steve. He said, "San Antonio?" "San Antonio," Steve said. 14 minutes from Mariposa Street, if I'm reading the map right." Roberto looked at Luciana. Luciana looked at Yolanda. Yolanda looked at the ceiling, and her lips moved without sound, and whatever she said was between her and the God she had been arguing with for 22 years, and the argument, it seemed, was finally over. The Peterson family, the winning team, who had been watching from the Fast Money podium through the entire exchange, crossed the stage. Brenda Peterson, the matriarch, a tall woman from Omaha with silver braids and the posture of a retired postal worker who had walked 12 miles a day for 30 years, went straight to Yolanda and took both of her hands and said, "Mama, I know exactly how hard this is. My ex-husband walked back into my life after 15 years, and I wanted to hit him and hold him at the same time. And I chose hold. You chose right." Her husband, Dale, shook Roberto's hand and said simply, "Welcome home, brother." The episode aired on a Friday. By Monday, the clip of Roberto walking through the doors, holding the blue mosaic tile, had been viewed 15.3 million times across platforms. By the end of the second week, the full segment crossed 54 million views. The hashtag 10 feet and a door trended globally in 17 countries and was adopted by family reunification organizations, parenting advocacy groups, and social work programs as a framing device for estranged family outreach. Luciana's line, "The distance was never as big as he thought," was quoted in a keynote address at the National Association of Social Workers' annual conference. A GoFundMe for Roberto's transition back to San Antonio, started by Matteo and managed by Anita, raised $187,000 in 10 days. Roberto kept enough to cover first and last month's rent on a small apartment in Alamo Heights, 12 minutes from Mariposa Street, and donated the rest to the San Antonio Family Service Association's Estranged Family Reunion Program. 3 months later, Roberto started at Cuesta Construction. He was assigned to a custom residential project in the King William District. His first day, He knelt on a bathroom floor with a wet saw and a level and a feeling he hadn't had in years. The feeling of kneeling in a house that was being built rather than one that was falling apart. His supervisor described him in his first review as the most skilled tile setter I've worked with in 30 years of construction. Roberto began training 2 apprentices within the month. 6 months after the episode, Luciana presented a case study at the Texas Conference on Social Work Practice titled The Mosaic Model, Using Craft and Object-Based Memory in Family Reunification. The paper proposed that estranged family members could facilitate reunion by identifying a shared physical object, a photograph, a toy, a tool, a piece of art, and using it as a bridge, a tangible thing that held the relationship during the years when the people in it couldn't. The paper cited Luciana's own experience. It cited the dollhouse. It cited the tile. 47 attendees requested copies. The University of Texas at San Antonio invited her to develop the model into a graduate seminar. A year after the show aired, Luciana received a call from a social worker at a family service agency in Houston. A man had walked into the office carrying a small wooden rocking horse he had carved for his daughter 11 years ago, before he lost custody. He told the intake worker, "I saw the lady on Family Feud with the tile. I brought what I had. Please help me find my girl." The agency connected them. The reunion took 4 months of mediated contact. It succeeded. The social worker called Luciana to tell her. Luciana sat in her car in the parking lot of her office and pressed her phone against her forehead and cried, because her own unfinished story had finished someone else's. And the math of that, the impossible, circular, redemptive math, was more than she could hold quietly. Today, Roberto Garza lives in Alamo Heights, San Antonio. He lays tile. He sees Luciana every Sunday for dinner. He sees Mateo and Anita, and their daughter, who is 4 and calls him abuelo, and demands to be carried on his shoulders the way Luciana once demanded. And Roberto carries her, knees aching, back protesting, carrying her anyway, because carrying grandchildren is not a burden. It is the repayment of a debt he will spend the rest of his life settling. He has been to the house on Mariposa Street 3 times. Yolanda has not invited him inside. She is not ready. She may never be ready. Roberto does not push. He waits on the porch. He drinks the coffee she brings him through the screen door. He asks about her work. He tells her about his. They talk the way 2 people talk when the history between them is so large that it can only be approached from the edges, carefully, one safe sentence at a time. Inside the house, on the shelf in Luciana's old bedroom, the dollhouse stands. It is dusty. The terracotta tiles in the living room have faded. The marble in the kitchen has a hairline crack from the time Mateo's daughter dropped it, and Luciana gasped. And Mateo said, "Relax, it's a toy." And Luciana said, "It's not a toy." And Mateo looked at his sister and understood, and never called it a toy again. In the dollhouse's tiny bathroom, the blue mosaic floor is missing 1 tile. A 4-inch square gap, bottom left corner, where a piece was removed 22 years ago by a man who needed to take something with him when he left. The tile is no longer in Roberto's wallet. It is in Luciana's nightstand drawer, in a small velvet pouch that Yolanda gave her without explanation or ceremony, just handed it to her one evening and said, "This is yours now." Luciana keeps it there. She does not put it back in the dollhouse. The gap is the point. The gap is the proof that something was missing, that someone carried it, that it traveled through 22 years and 4 cities and a voicemail, and a brother who fixes things, and a game show stage, and 10 feet of distance that felt like infinity and was actually just a door. The distance between a parent and a child is never as far as silence makes it seem, and every door that feels permanent is only waiting for someone stubborn enough to push it open. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell. This channel tells the stories that silence tried to keep. The next one is already here, and it might be the door that someone you love has been standing in front of for years.